Welcome to the L36 podcast, where the global exploration of cultural insights and stories of people making a difference big and small becomes the shift in perspective that makes us grow. I'm your host, Stephen Pearce, founder of L36, with my co-host Nina Winstead, and today we are speaking with Dr. Fred Luskin, a renowned psychologist, best-selling author, and a leading expert on forgiveness. With over 30 years of teaching at Stanford University and director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, he has helped tens of thousands of people globally. Today, he will be sharing the crucial importance of forgiveness to our individual well-being and potentially for a higher functioning society. All right, and we're recording.
Good.
Okay, so I'm just going to give it one of these, and then we can get started.
So I am interested in really what has you so interested in forgiveness?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that forgiveness is about the only thing that really truly worked for me in my life. That was it.
How?
Well, so I developed in going through my medical training, I developed mostly it was anxiety, and I could not get rid of it. And it was like full-blown panic attacks in the midst of talking to patients and walking out of the door because I'm having a panic attack while I'm talking to them. That's not helpful. That's not helpful at all, Fred.
But even in our relationship, we would go out to dinner, and we were new in our relationship when he was dealing with this. And he's, so talkative and lively, and there's no subject that he's not interested in exploring with people. And we would be in the middle of dinner, and all of a sudden I'd see him completely go quiet. And I saw it a few times, and I asked him about it later, and he told me it was this anxiety.
Yeah.
And yeah, but continue.
And Fred, and I did the traditional route. I went to therapy. I tried medication for it, and nothing was overcoming this. And I just thought I was doomed, that this was going to be my existence for the rest of my life. You ask me one simple question, and I cave and I fold and I just lose it. And eventually, I got to a place where I initially got into this idea of forgiveness at a spiritual psychology school. And I just thought, forgiveness is so wonky. It's silly. It's ridiculous. And then I said, okay, I don't have another choice. I've got to do something with this. And so the practice I got into was compassionate self-forgiveness, forgiving the misidentification or the misinterpretation of my own reality. And I would do it, and initially I would do it, and I was like, this is lame. This is so ridiculous. I feel so silly doing this. And I just kept at it, and I kept at it, and I kept at it. And I would also get into scenarios where I would get to the point where I could say, okay, this is a misinterpretation of reality. I get that mentally, but there's something still physiological going on that I'm still having trouble with. And eventually I combined this kind of forgiveness with, I guess you would say, a vulnerability or a group therapy. I would actually stand up in a group and talk about these most, ridiculous thoughts in my head that I thought, would be so silly to share. And in sharing, it would make this, it would change not just the mental, but also the physiological aspect of it. And it was really the physiological aspect that would bring so much. It would be really shameful. I mean, I would be ashamed of here I am. I'm supposed to have this persona of a physician, and yet I can barely talk to a group. I can barely talk to people one-on-one, and so it was really devastating. But I found that forgiveness became this path to healing that, and I don't feel like it's talked about a ton, at least in the circles that I find in my social media. And I felt that it was the critical piece that was lacking in overcoming everything. And now everything in my life, this anxiety, whatever that was, it's gone. I mean, it is gone. I'm not using medications. And it's not like it was a fleeting moment of it resolving. I feel like I had a return to who I knew that I was before all that developed. And I found that forgiveness was this fast track to that. And that's where
was it forgiveness of big things or just forgiveness in the moment? Like whatever it is that's disturbing me, I forgive it.
No, no, I mean, no, it was forgiveness of big things, little things, all kinds of things. A lot of misidentifications of my own, this is more of on a spiritual level, but getting into the more of the spiritual level of, past the idea of I'm not good enough, what's below that, and really diving into anything, any kind of obstacle that seems to stand in my way of why do I think I'm not good enough. So forgiveness allows this scenario where you have this safe space to explore the ideas of what happened to you in order to heal them, because you can reframe them as a misidentification or a misinterpretation of reality, or but especially of who you are personally, of you as an individual.
I mean, I would say my basic spiritual premise at this point is to try to forgive myself in everything as strongly and not unconditionally, but as openly as I can. It's evolved, but there's a sense that, and I know I got this somewhat from the Course in Miracles and somewhat from Jerry Jampolsky's work on Love is Letting Go of Fear, but this general sense that if I'm holding on to unforgiveness or something being wrong from the past, I'm misperceiving things.
Hmm. Yes. And you talk about that quite a bit. Is forgiveness for you, the way that you've described it in some situations, is changing the story that you've created. And that's the same as a misperception. So you're addressing the misperception, you're changing the story to a story that you've said is actually a little more accurate, that we do have agency, that we are not victims of this scenario, and that we have some more control than we realize, and that's more accurate than this identification with victimhood, which it very much aligns. I think I'm, as an onlooker, seeing this happen as a part, as his wife, seeing him go from moments where he's very uncomfortable to then never seeing that again, made me a believer in this concept of forgiveness. But I would say I might be one of those folks that you describe as, I still think that it might be helpful because I am one of those people, having not experienced it myself, the true benefits of this forgiveness practice that Stephen had dedicated years to accomplishing, that I might be helpful as an avenue to our audience members that may not have also gone through that path, but maybe have seen someone experience a forgiveness miracle
Yeah.
of sorts. So I thought maybe it would be great to talk to you. We thought it would be great to speak with you about it because you do have that spiritual element. It sounds like, that you teach wellness and all those things that you teach, even wellness at Stanford, right? And then you also have your scientific background as a researcher, so the impact on hormonal impact, the impact on psychology, and the impact on cardiology. I saw that you did some research, so I thought it'd be great to bring you on because you bridge those two avenues and essentially make a strong case to me, not a true skeptic, but I'm not fully converted, but to me and maybe our audience members, about the true powerful impact of forgiveness. Um,
But the strongest thing about it is what your husband's experience is,
mm,
that when people honestly try it on, they feel better. The other thing you said is the end result is a different story.
Mm.
Like forgiveness shows itself through your story. So, I came at things with, this person is terrible and they have harmed me. Well, that's just a story, and if I practice that story too much, I start to believe it. And forgiveness is nothing more than reorienting that story to one that's actually more true, because the story of victimhood is a useful story short term as a protection or a carve out, so you don't really have to confront a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
But long term, it makes you helpless.
Mhm.
The fact that that's not talked about generally is peculiar to me, because once your story arouses your nervous system habitually, you have to counter condition that to free yourself.
Yes, no, I think that that makes quite a bit of sense, the physiology element of it. Also, I think that that might be part of the reason why forgiveness, you also said that forgiveness is a medicine that few people want.
Oh, I can't tell you how often I have experienced that. I'm miserable, but don't really ask me to change.
Yeah.
Right.
and and I think that that's one of the things that I feel like if we were to accomplish anything with this episode of the podcast is if we can make a very strong case that forgiveness is a medicine that you want and that will improve our your life, will improve your relationships and improve your inner experience on a daily basis.
The metaphor that I developed years ago was there's many ways to heal stuff, but you get off the train, so to speak, only when you forgive.
Mm.
Like you're still on the train of hurt person until you forgive it, and then you don't need that identity anymore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, this was just a part of my life, but it's not me. And you can't do that without forgiveness. And I've always been surprised that more therapists don't understand that.
Yeah.
That that it's only when you forgive mom, like, just, hey mom, you did the best you could. It's not my problem anymore, and I hope you have a lovely life. That's when you're no longer identified as having been harmed by somebody. And so, like, we all need to forgive, but it you can do a lot of the world's healing. It's just that ending the drama of it is called forgiveness. Like, I'm no longer identified as somebody who's been harmed by you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say ending the drama, because it is one of those things that when you end the drama, is it possible that there are folks that don't want to end the drama?
Oh, of course, there's
And that's
lots of
why
them.
forgiveness is a medicine that is rejected, because if I take this medicine, I don't get the drama, and then what do I have?
And the other piece that scares each of us is, I then have to confront the fact that I'm responsible for my own experience. That once I stop blaming the past or other people, then I'm stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Fred, can we talk about this? Because I'm fascinated by this piece of it, which is really the victim piece, is the way I perceive it, and I think it's really nuanced. It's like, yeah, I'm sure there's people that are really hateful, and they love to be filled with drama, but I also think there's some of this that's almost, I want to use the word subconscious, like you're not aware. Like there is some nuance there to me that we're not always aware that we are putting on that mask of victimhood, and we think in our self-righteousness, or I'm right, you're wrong. you know I don't know if that's an evolutionary thing. I don't know, but going back to a physiologic response. But it's so interesting to me because I don't think anybody listening to this is gonna typically would say, "Oh, I want to be
I'm
the
a victim.
victim."
Yeah.
I don't think we think that way, and
No.
yet when we talk about this, of course I was being the victim. Once you kind of go through the thing, and I can see where I
Or
was.
I was being the victim for too long. It
Yeah,
was a part of my story for longer than the respite, longer than the rest
yeah,
that I needed.
yeah,
It was, 5 years isn't what I needed to recover from
yeah. But
this.
I guess what I'm
I
curious about is how
I
do you.
would be very cautious about thinking you need 5 years of victimhood,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's not unhealthy. Like if you know if your partner's cheating and blows up a marriage, or if somebody hits your kid and is drunk, there's a year or two where being a victim is not a bad place to be. It's because how else do you adjust to such a horrific change but from a position of weakness? It's when you start to get habituated to it and use that weakness as a weapon, that's when it becomes more dangerous. When you use it to hurt other people or you use it to not change, then it becomes problematic. But we are victims in some level for a while. You know, if somebody cuts you off on the freeway and almost kills you, you've been victimized by them. But a mature person 2 minutes later is no longer identifying as the person who was victimized.
Right.
So I'm sure that time period is, and thank you for that. That helps me clarify things. And I'm sure the time period is different for everybody. But I just, I get to the, okay, well, how long is too long, and how short is too short, and where are you really accepting the emotions that come through and then releasing them? I mean, how does that typically work for
I
folks?
mean, there is some research, I think, that like successful grief, like loss of a partner, like, real loss, the majority of people have gotten to a far better place within 2 years or so. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean that they're done, but they're functioning and
yeah.
and it's so that's a reasonable ballpark at some level because many of the traditions, the Jewish tradition, they give you a year to be the community mournee, but life moves on. And the problem with overindulging your own victimhood is it makes it harder to attend to the people who have become victims after you did.
Mm.
It's like life continues to emerge and other people's suffering shows up, and you don't want to be so lost in yours where you can't open up to the people around you who need your assistance,
Mhm.
which is why it needs to be time limited. We're not permanent, and our suffering is not permanent.
So when a community shows up for someone who has suffered, and the community shows up and honors this person who's in grief, helps support them while they're in this period of grief, then that way they could heal and move on to then be that support for another person in the community or other people in their community. Well, what I gather from that though is if we don't allow people that space of to recover from their grief, that they might take it then as, well, no one was there for me in my time of need, so I don't need to be there for others because I am fine now. And is that a pattern that maybe you see, that there is a useful place to just allow people this place of respite, this place of being a victim, this place of grief, and honoring that?
We we now conceptualize forgiveness as like the ultimate resolution of grief.
Mm,
That grief is a process, and if you're not helped by grief, it's really hard to get through it. It's not something you easily can do on your own. Real suffering, we need other people and we need support and we need advice and we need people to let us go batshit for a while because that's part of what human beings need when their life is turned upside down. And part of that is simply allowing the mind and nervous system to heal. You have to come back into equilibrium, but the equilibrium has changed. So if something really painful happens, you can't go back into the same reality you were in before it happened. And that upheaval we call grief. And it gets ended at some level when you're in a new equilibrium. But if you think that's going to be easy, it is not.
Mm.
And so you need help and you need a community and you need patience and you need accommodations because your whole being is thrown over. When that doesn't get supported, I'm going to say it's very hard for people to move through it. And I do believe we build up resentment when we suffer and have nobody there to
Yeah.
take some of the load.
Yes. So when you, in some of your research, what have you found to be the medical or the physiological changes in folks that practice forgiveness over time? Do their bodies change, or is there research on that? Is it measured?
Well, I mean, the biggest change is what happened to your husband.
Mm,
You go from an adrenalized wreck
adrenalized
to
wreck.
somebody who,
Yes,
you
hi,
know,
that was me.
He was very cute, though. Cute adrenalized wreck.
but that's what it is. You go from an over adrenalized, hyperactive, axis of arousal to somebody who's not generating all that arousal. So both your like mind heals and your body heals, and your nervous system can go back to somewhat normal. And if you really practice forgiveness, then you end up with more benevolence.
Mm,
Like you become a kinder person and a more helpful person. And so you get physiologic changes from positive emotion and from a desire to be better in the world. Those impact your physiologically as well. But the biggest is that that HPA arousal that can become a habit. And all you have to do is think for a second of whatever it is, and you're an adrenaline junkie. And that's what needs to be destabilized and then eliminated. And when you're not generating it by contempt and blame and hatred, your nervous system gets a chance to heal.
yeah. So we're keeping that arousal system fed by, let me throw in some blame into the fire. Let me throw in some victim. Let me throw in
Yeah,
this anger into the fire, and
yeah.
and then what's HPA stand for?
Well, the first thing you said is what people don't want to admit, which is why forgiveness teachers are not welcome, because they don't want to admit that in their present life, they are causing themselves harm. They don't want to admit that they're processing their stories, their beliefs are dangerous for them, and they are actively like co-creating an uncomfortable reality for themselves. They don't want to believe that. They want to blame someone else or something else or the past. So that's the biggest obstacle to moving on. It's their fault. It's not my body and my mind and my nervous system. The other question was what's HPA? Hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, I think.
Yeah.
And it's simply the quick, this is how you get adrenalized really quickly.
What I'm curious about is why did, or at least from your perspective, you listened to my story. I did meditation. I would go on the 7-day meditation retreats. It didn't do anything for me. I did the therapy. It didn't work. Why was forgiveness different for me? What's the difference between it and other things?
Well, let's normalize that question. Um, Not everything works for everyone.
Oh,
Mm.
there you go. Okay. Okay.
So your wife may go in and a 7-day meditation retreat might do the trick for her.
Yeah,
And, other things won't. There's no one diet for everyone, right?
that's
I
true.
mean, so you really want to take a step back from that question and not overgeneralize from one person's response. Once that is said, meditation is often hard to do when you're holding a grudge.
Mm.
Okay.
It can be very hard if you don't have a deep meditation practice to be mindful when you have unhealed stuff going on, because you end up just meditating on that.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
get that.
you just replay that in your mind.
I get that.
You have to have a
Sure.
really strong observing practice to be able to say, oh, there I am again, obsessing about something I can't change, or there I am again back in 1996. But that's a level of mindfulness that most people don't have, and one 7-day retreat would not necessarily create that. Meditation is generally not sufficient. It's a phenomenal tool. It is, and it does quiet your brain down, but it takes longer practice than that.
Yeah,
Mm,
I
I
could see
see.
that.
But the biggest answer is there's not one size fits all.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And I think that that's what I think is so important is that because I do meet a lot of people that, you know, they might say they're refractory to treatment, but you may just not know all of the different paths to healing. And I think that's why I love to bring up forgiveness, just to make sure people know about it, because they may not, they may have no clue about the entire world of forgiveness that's out there and people doing research like you.
Well, there's so many people who don't forgive that it's an obstacle by not being used. It may not be the optimal solution for everyone, but the lack of awareness of it and the lack of practice of it definitely are harmful culturally,
Mm,
Yeah,
because you have families ripped apart, you have marriages ripped apart, you have friendships ripped apart because people simply don't practice forgiveness enough, and they allow their grudges to assume too big of a space in their minds. It's like, I don't like what that person did, and that's fine, you can share that, but that doesn't mean you can't forgive them. And the other piece, and this is, our minds, our nervous systems create for us a really distorted view of the world.
mm,
I mean, we have such a massive negativity bias that we don't see anything clearly. I mean, we're on guard, alert for danger, mistrustful, anxious. Those are the defaults. So everything gets perceived through that, and we miss a good percentage of life's beauty.
mm,
And so I'm going to say that's probably the biggest reason why people don't naturally forgive, is they don't have an accurate appraisal of what life is. So you guys are married. How long you been married?
uh, two,
2 years,
3 years,
3 years.
3 years.
We've had two
21.
kids in that time. So
June of 21.
yeah,
June of 21.
yeah, since 2021.
Yeah. So if you spend time with someone, they're going to both annoy you, disappoint you, and delight you,
Delightning. Yes.
right?
We're still
Right.
in the delightful stage.
Whoa.
But but the nervous system stores the annoyance more readily than it stores the delight.
Yeah.
And so if you're not careful, you start taking the person for granted because you're paying more attention to what they don't do than what they do. And your nervous system, again, in its quest for novelty, which is another survival thing, takes doesn't notice the patterning of someone who's loyal and kind and steadfast.
Mm,
So you don't see a lot. And that's the biggest reason why forgiveness is so hard, because we don't get an accurate view of the world. So you can ask married couples, and I'm not asking you, but you ask people, so what do you like about your partner? And they say, well, they're a nice guy and, they're a good person. But then you say, what don't you like? And they give you 800 things because that's what they notice. And once you get started on that, the mind opens up to more. So, the most important practice for becoming more forgiving is to start paying attention to what's good and learn to say thank you for it. Because then your nervous system balances and your view of the world becomes more accurate.
More accurate.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
so. I started this gratitude, early morning gratitude practice where I would just think of the things that I'm thankful for. And I swear, and I've probably said it on this podcast before, but I swear that that shifts the entire experience of my day,
Mhm.
the entire experience of, and I can't explain why really, but I think that those negative thoughts don't come up as much. I'm not hitting up against negativity constantly when I start with positivity and being thankful.
Yeah.
I think the only things to add to gratitude's wonderful. The caution with gratitude is in our culture, we're kind of taught to make it about us.
Yeah.
So if you
Mm.
read Facebook or LinkedIn, it's all, I'm grateful that I'm wonderful. I mean, that's basically what you read. Like, I'm so grateful that I got this award and I'm so grateful that I got this opportunity. That's not actually what gratitude is. The power of gratitude is from its humility, is from the fact that I got something that's not because of me, it's because something else has value, not me, and I'm the lucky recipient of it. That's why it's so powerful,
Yeah.
is it when you're humble, like, wow, this person loves me, making the good them, not boy, am I great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, when you
But
put it like that, it sounds ridiculous. That
well, it is ridiculous, but that's what we're taught, and that's
Mhm.
socially what's everywhere. I
Mhm.
just want to let you know how proud I am of myself. It's like,
Right.
but the two pieces that, besides gratitude, that are essential, I'm going to say, for a healthy marriage, besides just gratitude, is the active giving of thanks. Like, to not just notice and store it, but share it. And then the decision to be generous to repay it.
What does that mean?
Well, if you see somebody being kind, thank them and return the favor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's how gratitude has full impact.
There's an action involved.
And it's your giving to repay what was given, to pay it forward. That's how gratitude can be the most powerful thing out there.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And if you could allow me to maybe go through, because I know you've studied forgiveness in places of real conflict, and you also have your book that you're putting out that we can maybe talk about later, but about recovery, also in the role of forgiveness and recovery. And these are very heavy things. And if you allow me to maybe give an example of maybe something that is more mundane and maybe the role of forgiveness in that scenario, and you can kind of add your commentary, I think about maybe why some people might not let go of forgiveness because of that, or let go of their grievances and not practice forgiveness because of that adrenaline rush that you get is fueling. And I think from a professional standpoint, I can think of a scenario where a client, there's three of us fighting for this client, and the client put us in a room together, I think really just to try to see if we would rile each other up to get maybe better proposals. And that worked. We did rile each other up. But I remember going into that meeting, and one of the comments that was thrown my way was so cutting, and I didn't allow myself to say anything in response because I wanted that anger to stew in me, because I wanted to then bottle that anger and take it back to win the client. And I acknowledged it as it was happening, and I thought, man, this might not be healthy, but I need it to win the client.
Well, but it's not unhealthy short term.
Short term, yes. So
What would be
chronically,
unhealthy is if you held a grudge against the person who said it so that it distorted your viewpoint about
mm-hmm,
that person.
right.
But if you used it once for a few minutes and said, "This is my fuel, and I'm consciously using it to keep myself aroused," and you don't hold it for too long, because if you hold it for too long, your performance diminishes.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've done that with fighter pilots. They've put them on simulators and they get them angry as to see if it makes them more effective. And it does for like 15 minutes. And then their performance tanks.
Oh, wow.
So operating in that state where you're chronically just overstimulated, you're not meeting your performance potential.
Well, once it becomes a habit, like your prefrontal cortex goes offline.
Mm,
So certain kinds of thinking are not even available to you.
certain kinds of thinking are not even available to you.
No, they're not even
That's
available to you.
beautifully said. Yeah.
You can't see the good in people. You can't do certain kinds of creative problem solving. You can be angry and you can use that anger in a limited number of directions. But if you were in any kind of long-term relationship with those people, it would be destructive for you because you would not be able to think well and you would lose your edge in any kind of real creative need to forge alliances or think subtly. All that's gone.
I would think
But
that's
as a,
sorry,
it's
go ahead.
designed, no, it's designed for what you did. Anger is a short term, like flare to say there's something wrong here and you need to deal with it.
Right. I would think that that is an incredibly compelling argument for adopting a forgiveness practice is that you're just going to be better at whatever your work you're doing and better in your relationships because you'll have access to more functioning of your brain and in your capacity. I think the one of the arguments I could think of also for forgiveness is when preparing for this, I was thinking why there is a fear that I have that I'm going to turn into some of these folks that I feel like never forgive. The worst insult that I could throw at someone is that they're boring. And I think people who don't forgive, who retell the story over and over of the same structured story about how they've been wronged, or it's literally the same story about how they've been wronged, is like they're just man, they're just so boring. And I don't want to be that person when I get older. I don't want to be that person now. And so I want to, I don't know why I even brought that up, but I do think,
No, but that's a really powerful framing.
yeah, because as we get older, I think our community becomes more and more important. Life happens. Who knows what type of grief we might have to, yeah, God forbid, we'll have to endure, but we'll need our community. And if we've bored them to death already, they're not going to show up for us.
Well, but it also distorts your view.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to be the kind of person who thinks badly of other people before they have a chance simply because you've been hurt and disappointed in the past. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I hear you saying.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get too much into the habit of talking about your grudges and how people didn't do this and how people didn't do that, then it will distort your view.
Yes, yes, and we want to see the real reality of the world.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had a friend who I remember he was in his 30s and he met a woman that he really liked. But he came back and was talking to me and maybe somebody else about how much baggage she had. You know, maybe she was 35, give or take. And he liked her and she had all these baggage. And what I'm picturing is her and all this designer luggage, like between she and him.
Yeah.
But he didn't recognize all the luggage he had between him and her. And I'm seeing them like sitting across from each other with 12 pieces of luggage
Wow.
between them.
What a beautiful
And
image.
but you don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's great. We have a few more minutes left, and I think we like to end our podcast on a question about what you're most curious about now or what you're working on now, and that might be a good segue into your current book.
I mean, I've been trying for my whole career to find the simplest and clearest way to describe forgiveness so that people and myself would want to do it. That's been my ambition. The book I just wrote on it's a workbook on recovery with our forgiveness principles came out of research we're doing on self forgiveness mostly
Mm.
in people with recovery issues, but the workbook is for all forgiveness, and it was my way of 15 years after writing my last book adding what I had learned about how to make forgiveness accessible. That's been my interest. Besides making sure I practice it myself, because it's not that pleasant to go out and tell other people to practice it when you're not liking your mother-in-law or whatever.
Mhm.
It just doesn't feel right, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's this burden of having to walk the talk, and that
Yeah.
never goes away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The burden of having to walk the talk. I wonder if this podcast is our self-inflicted burden
To walk the
to
talk.
walk the talk, and we're talking
Exactly.
about our pillars
Yeah.
for
Uh,
self-forgiveness.
yeah. It is important to walk the talk. You have to. It's not
Yes.
easy. You know, it's what's interesting though is that it's not easy when if you're gonna walk the talk and you don't and the stimulus goes away. You know, I think a lot of these
Mm.
practices work when the stimulus is so strong you have no choice. You know, your mother died, or you're in grief, or something terrible happened, and you're really hurting. Then these practices come up, and they seem like you have no other direction to go but into them. And then when you're on the other side, then you're like, ah, I'm okay. I don't need that anymore.
Mm.
I'm fine. And then little things creep in, you know?
But that's not really the other side. That's some denial based thing. If you really do the practices and you work on it, you know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And you know you're never completely done. Like that's the humility of real practice. What you said before is the grief and disruption are natural healthy parts of life. So there's going to be things that happen that upset us, disrupt us, cause us to have resentments. The crucial question is what used to be Dr. Phil's question. How's that working for you? That's the crucial question.
Right.
That's the only question. Like, so for 3 months after your boss fires you, yeah, maybe it's effective to stick pins in a doll of him. But a year later, it's just stupid. You need to
It's
get
just
back out and look for a job.
Yeah.
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 But the question is, at some point, the coping of bitterness, of mistrust, they stop being helpful and they make our life worse, not better. And it takes a certain honesty to recognize that, like, yes, it made sense for me to fall apart for 2 weeks, but it doesn't make sense for me to fall apart for 2 months. I have too many responsibilities and whatever. But you don't want to demonize like the suffering, because there will always be things that overwhelm your coping. It's just for how long and with what intensity, and how passive you are. It's like the mindfulness piece comes in always. Like, you want to get some capacity to watch your behavior, and that's our guide. That's our guardrail.
Okay.
You know, Fred, one of the things that I would love to talk to you about, because you mentioned A Course in Miracles, and I studied A Course in Miracles for quite a while, and the thing about forgiveness for me was that it's almost like it opened me into a spiritual plane or existence that I didn't really have access to otherwise.
Absolutely.
And that's what it felt like. It opened up a different experience or a different perspective of the world and why things are happening to me and what I can learn from them, and lesson, no matter how hard it could be for me to understand, for me or any other individual, that there may be a spiritual process or lesson that's going on for me or that person. That doesn't, negate the horrific things that happen in the world, but it allows me personally to go through something and say, okay, I'm upset. What is going on here? What can I learn from this? And that can be at a very, basic, survival level, but it also can be at a deep spiritual level, that I know that I'm learning something from this. And that, whether you buy into it or not, was very healing for me to open up to that idea.
And that what may be why people and therapists struggle so much with it, because they're not available to the transpersonal spiritual awarenesses that can come from it.
Yeah.
But if you really forgive, you're making a deep peace with your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Deep peace with
And
your
that's a
life.
pretty profound thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm like converted. Skeptic is converted.
The skeptic's converted.
If I wanted to start small, because I'm busy, but this sounds critically important to my relationships, my work, my general health. If I wanted to start small, but I'm busy, is it possible to start small? And what could I do?
Yeah. The next time you get stuck in traffic and you get annoyed, forgive the traffic.
Okay. Okay. Next time I
The,
get annoyed,
the
forgive.
next time you go to the supermarket and there's a long line, forgive the line.
Okay.
The next time you go to a restaurant and somebody doesn't give you great service, forgive the service.
Mm,
Practice forgiving the daily small stuff. That's how everybody starts.
okay.
Yeah. That's great.
Easy
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to.
I got a lot of forgiving to do.
Yeah, I know. I'm like thinking about all the. I gotta forgive that I haven't forgiven.
I'm just gonna be forgiving all day long.
Yeah.
It's never gonna stop.
Yeah. Wow.
Cute.
How wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Fred Luskin.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us on the L36 podcast, where stories and cultural wisdom spark the shifts that help us grow. Today's conversation with Dr. Fred Luskin reminded us that forgiveness isn't just a spiritual idea, it's a practical medicine. It's the quiet act that helps us reclaim agency, restore our physiology, and rewrite the stories that hold us back. Whether it's forgiving traffic or a lifetime of pain, forgiveness opens the door to deeper peace, not just with others, but within ourselves. If this resonated with you, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it. These conversations are just the beginning. To dive deep into today's topic or explore more of what we do, visit us at l36.io, where you'll find resources, upcoming events, and a global community of adventurers and change makers committed to personal and cultural transformation. Follow us on social, stay connected. We'll see you on the next episode of the L36 podcast.